Hello, family. Pastor Vance P. Ross here, the Central United Methodist Church. We are the church at the heart of the city, with the city at heart. On tonight, because I am away, we will not have Wednesday Wellness at 6:30 as we usually do on my page. Rather, we will have on the Central United Methodist Church page a rebroadcast regarding spiritual and mental wellness in the holidays. We did this a couple of years ago, but it is pertinent, it is important even for now. You know, holidays can be difficult days for many, And because of what we've been through with the pandemic, because of what we've wrestled with the escalation of violence and vitriol in our political and social realms, this is always important. So we invite you to be at the Central United Methodist Church Facebook page. Be sure you check us out there and on YouTube. We look forward to you being with us and being blessed. We'll see you again next week on the Vance P. Ross page. Thank you so very much for all you do. Take good care. Keep the faith. Be safe. Wear your mask, family. As always, be well. Bye now. Here's a little more Kirk Whalum. We did a piece of this last week. I love it. It's called The Little Ghetto Drummer Boy. Sing. Don't you like it? Yeah. Peace. Be well. My dear sisters and brothers, good evening. Grace to you and peace from God through our Lord Jesus the Christ, who's the author and indeed the giver of life. Vance P. Ross is my name. I'm the senior pastor of the Central United Methodist Church. We are church at the heart of the city, with the city at heart. Thank you so very much for being with us tonight for this special edition of Wednesday Wellness. Brothers and sisters, this is a follow-up to an earlier edition, but it's more. The holidays, paired with the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and white supremacy racism, bring especially pointed needs and concerns to this time of the year. We hope that all will join us, invite others to be with us as well, as we spend some time tonight around mental health, mental and spiritual wellness in the time of COVID-19, new pandemic, and white supremacy racism, a 400-year-old pandemic. We're with our guests that we've had before, the Reverend Ramal Toon, Dr. Nicole Kamick, and Dr. Warren Mitchell. We're so very, very glad they're going to be with us. Now, we want to invite you to offer some questions in the comments section. At about 7:10, we're going to come to you for those direct questions after we've had some conversation here. Please place any and all comments or questions you have in the comment box. Remember, we're looking for questions. Right now, we want to bring on my dear, dear friend, a mental health advocate, an author, a philanthropist, preacher, a teacher, just my dear, dear buddy and friend, the Reverend Ramal Toon. Reverend Toon comes on. Reverend, my man, thank you so very much for being with us again. Thank you so much for helping us to have this here tonight.
Hey, man, thank you for having me, Vance. It's always good to be in fellowship with you and the members of Central.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Look, man, let's jump right in. We want to get your perspective on mental health, some holiday triggers. This is a time when death, grieving, past hurts, all come up. Add to that COVID-19, the things we're seeing over and over again in the streets, just a great difficulty. Give us some of your perspective around mental health and this time of the year.
Yeah, I think that I always approach it as a mental health advocate through a lens of empathy and the things that I've had to work on myself as it relates to the holidays and all of the various dynamics you just pointed out. Christmas especially, this is a time where, unlike Thanksgiving, but in a very real sense, we want to be with family. We're mindful of those we have lost, and the family members we can't see, that bring some emotional challenges and some stress that I think sometimes you can be unaware of why you're stressed and why you're frustrated, until you sit down and really ask yourself, what is behind my feelings? What is causing me to feel stressed, to feel anxious, to feel angry, to feel discouraged or sad. Personally, there have been times when, Christmas, I'm normally with my kids, used to be with my kids, especially when they were younger, but now they've grown, and that's an adjustment. Christmas isn't gifts under the tree. Christmas is cash. The older they get, the less stuff they want, and they do want stuff, they just don't want you picking it. Cash App is the new Christmas tree.
Yeah.
But it's an adjustment when, you reminisce over the way things were when children were young and when they were home, and kind of miss that level of connection. For those who don't have it now, for a number of people, their children will come home, or if they have younger children, they are home. As it relates to grief, I think the thing that I used to grieve, and I didn't grieve it in a healthy way, was the loss of not having a childhood. We grew up pretty poor. My mom has substance abuse issues. And even before her addiction issues, we just didn't have money. And, it got worse because of addiction. But prior to that, we didn't have money. And one of I will never forget the Christmas that I didn't get anything. And it's a story that still makes me feel some kind of way. Christmas came, I had no gifts, and we, back in the day, we had layaway, and my mom didn't have the money to get things out of layaway, and she told me that, and the best she could do was show me pictures of what I was gonna get on the other side of Christmas. And so my way for a long time as an adult to compensate for the trauma of that one year, and really the trauma of growing up with so many economic challenges, was overdoing it on Christmas. For myself, I'd spend just way too much money. When I finally had children, it was just ridiculous, the number of gifts under the tree. And at the time, I was unaware that I was compensating for what I didn't have, and trying to give myself not only what I felt I deserved, but overdoing it. It was kind of like I was trying to soothe that pain by showing myself that I'm capable, I have agency now, and I can buy all these gifts. Now, granted, I was putting myself in a lot of debt, or if not debt through credit cards and things of that sort, just spending unnecessary amounts of money, and not having any balance. And so over time, and doing the work, I realized that a lot of it was tied to the trauma of my childhood. And now as an adult, I'm trying to relive that in a way, and in some ways it just wasn't healthy for me. And I think people do that.
How did you become conscious of what these feelings were? Often we have a feeling, a sadness, a pain, and we're not aware where it comes from. What made you aware that, hey, I'm overdoing it here? And what's causing this? What made you sit back to that?
That's a good question. It happens in phases. I think we're constantly growing and becoming. And the first part of it was really beginning to come to a deeper sense of the life I truly desire to live, financially. So looking at how do I live beyond just this moment, and what will be available for me that I'm preparing for the future. And that required looking at how I used money as a tool, not just for the present, but for the future. And then starting to, discipline myself and ask myself hard questions around why am I spending the way I'm spending? What am I trying to heal in me? Because a lot of the stuff I bought was really trying to compensate for some things that were going on in me that I thought money and appearance could fix. When, realizing that through therapy, money wasn't going to be the solution, that the wounds caused by my childhood that then created some of the absence of self-worth and value couldn't be replaced by money and things that I could, I just looked like a fancy broken person, all dressed up and broken on the inside. And I didn't want to live that way. And so it required just doing the work on me to become a better version of myself, and realizing that money is a tool. It's not the solution to the things that were hurting on the inside. And I needed to, heal the way I viewed myself, and even in some ways heal the way I remembered those experiences, because it wasn't all bad. But I was making my decisions based on the bad things that happened, rather than allowing my life to be guided by the good things that also happened, that allowed me to still be here.
Okay. That's it came in phases, and you mentioned, of course, you mentioned therapy. So let's invite our therapists in, see if they can. That segues, but let's bring them in and see if they can be helpful to us as we continue this conversation. Sisters and brothers on Facebook and on a conference call, we want to invite you, please, to see if you can get some questions or comments into the comment line so that we can continue this conversation in a little bit. We're going to have now Dr. Warren Mitchell. He is a therapist here in Georgia, renowned, does work all over the state, and does a lot of work through and with Reverend Ramal Toon. We're also inviting with him Sister Nicole Kamek, Dr. Kamek, excuse me. Dr. Kamek practices in the Washington, D.C. area, is like Reverend Toon, a Howard alum.
Yes, sir.
And they got that HU thing going, the Mecca. And we're so very, very glad to have both of them here with us to help us to deal with and to address these days and these times, and the importance, absolute importance, of knowing where one is emotionally, spiritually, by paying attention to our mental health and healing. We want to welcome both of them to the screen. Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Kamek, thank you so very much for being here at Central United Methodist Church's Wednesday Wellness. We're the church at the heart of the city, with the city at heart again. And it's so good to see you all again. We're just so very, very glad, so very, very blessed to have you here.
It's an honor. Thank you for inviting me back here. Appreciate it. We had a great time last time, and look forward to today.
And I agree. Thank you for having me again.
Oh, it's so great. We're so very, very glad. You're more than welcome. You heard Ramal's conversation, some of it anyway, about gradually coming to some sense of some of the things that were going on with him around money, around anxieties, and how those came up at this time. In these days, you all are therapists for a living. What are you experiencing now, in addition to what Ramal talked about, or maybe just that? What are you all experiencing as major anxieties of this particular moment? Dr. Kamek, I want to ask you first. What is it from your clients?
It's interesting because I think typically around this time of year, we see an increase in people seeking therapy, probably because of many of those things, both in terms of, whatever unresolved childhood issues or traumas or experiences they may have had, but also that pressure that comes along with giving and gifts, because so much of the holidays starts to be attached to like these monetary things. I think what's unique for this year, of course, is living through this pandemic and what that has done for people. So both financially, lots of people have lost their jobs or are struggling financially, and you're adding the holidays into that. The other piece that's coming up is not being able to celebrate the holidays in the same way, or having to feel like, am I taking a risk to still see my family, but I also don't want to be alone. Right. And that's a difficult one, and a difficult decision to make. And I work with a lot of people who have lost a loved one to COVID-19. And then this is that first holiday season without that person. And so going through the holidays and thinking about grief and what that looks like for people. So those anxieties around finances, loss, both and thinking about the loss of a loved one, but also the loss of connections, the loss of some of the traditions that come with the holidays are coming up for a lot of people.
All right, brother, Dr. Mitchell. Same
Yeah,
question.
I agree with Dr. Kamek. I'm sorry for pronouncing your name wrong. But with there's an increase with people seeking out services, seeking out support. This has been going on throughout the pandemic. You know, I am like 2.5 weeks booked, and having to turn people away or refer them elsewhere. And it's sad. There are a lot of people who are struggling. There are some clients who have canceled out Christmas or the holidays because of a death of a loved one during that time, or just missing that person, just so that they won't feel that pain. They try to make this just as a regular day or regular season, and for them, and they have people years. I think I've had a couple clients like years. They've just canceled Christmas. They don't celebrate Christmas. Not that they stop believing in God. They're done with it. They're sick and tired of the pain. And they've had a new client last week who just lost her father to COVID, and it was early as in April, so nobody could visit him, and died alone. And people like that, they also question God's presence. Like, where are you, Lord? Where are you, Lord, in this space? Like, are you for real? How could this happen? And so there's all this stuff that the season could trigger for a lot of people. That's meant for a season of hope, a season of love, a season of even redemption in a sense. And for them, they're experiencing loss and grief, and things are just not the same.
When you talk about canceling celebration, and when you raise the notion of you can't celebrate without a risk, how are people negotiating that? Or when you've lost somebody to COVID, or you've lost somebody to cancer, or to another disease, another malady, an accident, how are people negotiating that? What are ways and means to negotiate that? Either of the three of you.
So I think for some, it's learning to be in the space that they're in, and instead of that, some family members or friends were trying to encourage them to come. You can't do that. You got to let that go. You got to move on. Blah blah blah. And I think one of the best things is like letting people be where they are in the space that they're in, to go through that grieving process, definitely seeking help, because even though that's where you are, doesn't mean that that's where you have to live. And unfortunately, some people may make this their home, being in this space, or this becomes a part of their identity, this state of suffering that they never let go of. And I think some people negotiate even by having a sense of faith. And we hear a lot about faith and doubts. And I think we are such a people of great faith that in spite of all the disappointments, the negative stuff, and time again, that we continue to believe in this God that we cannot feel, hear, taste, touch, smell, and we continue to hold on. So there are a lot of people are exercising their faith to help them cope during this time. There are some who try to, and I don't agree with this part of it, they try to really believe in God, that God has their back, but they have issues against God for not having their back. And I think my suggestion for people like that is you bring that to God. You know, God already knows where you are and what you are. He's not afraid. I mentioned to a group I provide supervision for yesterday that if we look at truth as being organic, truth is not afraid of being challenged. You cannot come to truth with anything that truth is going to make itself doubt itself. Truth knows who it is. So it's not afraid of you coming to it with what it has, what you have, with where you are and your doubts and your questions. It wants to hear. It wants you to come and become part of it, because that's what you were created out of, truth and love. And so I think the same essence with God, that God is the essence, the organic being of truth and love. He's not afraid of the challenge and wants it to build intimacy with us during this time of grief and pain and suffering. So I think God invites this space. He's not afraid of it. He's not afraid of being challenged.
Okay, Brother Ramal, I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to talk to Dr. came in, Ramal, he's talking a lot of your language. He talks about truth. When you're talking about truth though, and talking about God, and you feel like God has abandoned you in this kind of moment, you're by yourself, you can't celebrate, you've lost a loved one. What kind of truth do you tell God? This is the God of the ages. What can you really risk with that God, Ramal Toon?
So yeah, I've been there especially with loss when my mom passed. But I've found that in order to have that kind of honest conversation that Warren is referring to, in order to have that kind of honest conversation with God, I had to detach myself from what I was taught traditionally in church, with this idea of don't question God, and well, God knows everything. And it was like, it wasn't serving me well. It felt like God was just this intimidating parent that I didn't have the right to question. And so in essence, I think people were imposing on me their own upbringing. The don't talk back was applied to God too. So I had to disconnect myself from that and realize that God is much bigger than any of these human connections and ideas of the imagery we place on God of Father. And in doing so, I just, I talk to God like I just talk. I don't try to find fancy words. I don't try to, talk like I'm talking out of the King James version. I just talk like Ramal. And if I'm angry, I say it. If I'm disappointed with God, I say it. But I also find that for me, being in conversation with God in that way has been therapeutic. Because oddly enough, in that type of honest confession of anger, disappointment, fear, discouragement, and hearing myself talk, because I literally say it out loud, I can almost sense God's response in the midst of me just letting these things come out of my mouth around and realizing that God actually had nothing to do with any of those things other than being with and present to me in the midst of all of them. And I then find myself asking God more questions around, show me where you are. Show me how to connect with you, because right now I feel distant and I feel like you're not paying attention to me. And I need that to show up somehow. But then realizing that sometimes the very thing we begin to ask God for in those moments of anger, frustration, and disappointment, I was oftentimes yearning for connection. When connection came, I rejected it. And so it was as if I was asking God to do something that I wasn't even willing to receive when it was offered by people. Not realizing that oftentimes God shows up through the people, that phone call or that person who shows up, or the text message or whatever it might be, is the actual response. And so I then find myself asking God to make me aware of how you're moving. And I look for it in all kinds of things. The other aspect of that Warren laid out, I think that to approach God as a God of truth requires we have to be honest with ourselves. And I think that that's when you're in a real conversation with God, when you're willing to admit to God what you know about you, that you haven't necessarily wanted to give voice to. I think that's when relationship with God goes to a whole new level. When we lay before God the ashes, the stuff we don't want God to see, that we actually want to cover up. Sometimes it's that anger, that brokenness, that sadness. In a season like this, even as it relates to all the dynamics in this country around race. I take those conversations with God, especially those, because I get real mad. And
okay,
being honest with God about those things allows me to, one, release it and not carry it in my mind and my spirit and in my body, and then be available or receptive to when God responds.
Be available and be receptible. Dr. Kamek, be available and be acceptable is really talking about the V word, it sounds like to me, the V cuss word, vulnerability. And then another word, Dr. Kamek, that it seems this honesty that Ramal and Warren talking about, this intimacy talks about, there's a kind of intimacy you got to have to be that honest. And how do we get, or why would we get in a mental state to be that vulnerable and that honest with anybody that we could see, much less something Warren said that we can't see, feel, taste, touch. Well, what's up with that? Why would we do that? And how's that beneficial? How's that truth Ramal's talking about beneficial?
Yeah, something I wanted to add to that, Ramal. I was thinking sometimes people need that language and that permission to even say those things and permission to talk to God in that way. I think oftentimes when I work with people who have experienced trauma and they question God, they don't have like the words to even say, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? And not feeling empowered to even ask the questions because somewhere along the line, having those questions means that you're questioning God, that it's something about your faith, and people don't want to live in that space. And so a lot of times it's just giving people that language and that permission to even say, that's normal. You're right. That was hard. And just validating people in that and having those spiritual guides that people can go to and feel safe to even disclose that, because oftentimes that's not even something people want to admit to other people for fear of judgment. I think vulnerability is a tricky one because vulnerability, you're taking those layers back. Sometimes we don't even want to be vulnerable with ourselves because you're going to have to face some things that maybe you're not ready to or that you don't want to acknowledge. But there is so much power in that vulnerability. But I do think it has to be with people that you trust. So when you think about that therapeutic relationship, when you think about those people who are in your life that can hold those vulnerabilities and not use them against you, because that's part of the fear too, is that not only are you going to judge me, I'm going to hear about this later, or you're going to use that against me in some way. Who are your spiritual guides? Who can you go to and have those conversations? But the real change happens, as you said, Ramal, when you can be honest with yourself, when you can have that vulnerable moment, and when you can be open, that's where you start to see what is on the table. What am I really dealing with? And now how am I going to deal with that? That's where therapy can help.
Help me with some language there, because if I've grown up in this, don't question God, and I've been ripped to my core. I've lost a job. Mm-hmm. I've lost a family member. I've lost face. I've something's happened, and I'm in shame, and I'm in this context. What would I do? What would be some of the language I might use? And where would I find the person when so many around me are judgmental, or you need to let that go? How long you gonna cry over that? What do I do? What language? What would you offer, Dr. Kamek?
You hit it on the head with that. I'll tell you this. I saw it in action. I worked in a trauma group and we had a chaplain. I think I talked about this the last time. And something that she did that was just so like welcoming and like non-judgmental is when people, whatever they had to say about God, she didn't question it. She didn't try and change it. She didn't say it was right or wrong. She let it be. And then she provided guidance on like, where can you find that comfort? What can you, like, if you had to say this, what would it be? Or maybe you feel that way for now and you can sort of put that here, but what would help you continue to work through some of those things? And so maybe sometimes the words is just, what do you feel? Why are you mad at God? What do you think God did? What do you think should have, like just to start to get through some of those layers of what it is, so that you can get to that space that Ramal talked about of just saying like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe it's not, sometimes we might look at it one way, but maybe there are pieces of hope, or saying, wow, these are the ways that people still showed up for me, or that support showed up. Sometimes we may experience something like you said, and people around us are showing up, and it's like, oh, wow, all of this time I thought I was alone, but there were people carrying me through that. Maybe that's part of God helping you to get through this, but sometimes we don't see that.
Mm-hmm. Are there ways we can recognize who's around us? What would help us when we're in that isolated space mentally and spiritually? How would we recognize who the people are? Dr. Kamak, and then Warren, then Ramal.
Oh, I just had this conversation with someone who lost her husband at the beginning of the pandemic, and she's like, there's nobody. Nobody is here. I'm by myself. And I just sort of listened. And then it was like, well, who are the people who call you, who always show up for you? If you look through your phone right now, who are the people that check in? Who are the people that were there both before your husband passed and after? Who are the people that when you're around them, you feel comfortable? That you don't, like, even if you have that guard up, they still show up and they're consistent. I have people sometimes think through, like, when you were with people, when did, and you felt your happiest, or you felt the most like yourself, or you could feel authentic in those moments. Who were those people? What was it about them? How do you know that they love you or they care for you? And really have people to look through those things. Like, she could start to say, oh, such and such does call me all the time, but I blow her off. It's like, or she actually did a grief group through her church, and being able to talk about some of the other attendees who were in that group and how they check on each other, and how she does isolate or maybe doesn't respond. And it's like, well, whereas you feel some of your friends may not understand, are there people in that group who may know what it's like leading up to Christmas next week? So really starting to like question some of that, no, I'm just alone, and getting beneath those layers are like, okay, let's explore that a little more.
Okay, thank you. Brother Warren, want to continue that, you and Ramal, but also want to continue from the macho spot. Brother, there ain't nobody around, I don't need nobody. How do you begin to recognize if once you begin to see you do need something? How do you recognize who's there when you're a macho, when you grew up in the hood or grew up with the brothers that say you got to man up?
Yeah, it's difficult for a lot of guys who have not had that experience, especially from another male, to be able to come to that place to acknowledge that this is where I am. And I think it's finding a space where, as Lady Nicole mentioned, where you feel safe, where you feel comfortable, where you feel at peace. And sometimes that might not necessarily be with a person, but it could be with a walk in nature. And if that's where you need to go and cry out, then you go do it. If that's for some guys. For some people, it might be just exercising, working out. For them, they release a lot of their stress and energy in that space, and allows them to be more relaxed, where they might even be more open to talking to somebody else while playing a sport or exercising or working out together. And I think providing some of those experiences for other men, we have to be open to crossing our comfort zones and recognizing that this is not just a man, this is a human being who is in pain. And how can I be with a human being who is in pain, and removing the scripts or the stereotypes that we have created and written for people. As a man, this is how I have to communicate to this person. Sometimes it could be, for some people, for some men, is not seeing God as a father, but seeing God as mother might help for some people. And that I feel more comfortable talking to a female. Let me see if I can see God with a female energy. Can I be more open and sharing more of me? Because I might see God as my father, or my father sucked, and I'm not going to talk to God in that way. But maybe as a mother, because I don't think God, in my perspective, is in a box of gender that we can identify. This is all of who God is, especially when we look at all the attributes of who God is. A lot of feminine qualities is what we see and experience. And so I think for the guy who's searching for a place, what I call home, see God in a place that makes you feel at home, and interact with him or her or it from that space.
Okay. Ramal, what's the word on the playground, on the hood, on the corner? What that word need to be? Because a lot of successful people are from them spots.
Yeah, sure. And I think that, when dealing with men who have what I guess the language we use now is toxic mindset around masculinity, it's really looking at, like, how has this idea of manhood served you well? Like, in what ways has it benefited you? And in what ways has it been a true detriment to your ability to thrive and experience the life you truly desire around connection, around community, in every aspect of your life? And so when we're dealing with, a Christmas season and men who may feel some kind of way emotionally around sadness, grief, remembering childhood trauma, and this idea of just carry it or just, put it away or let it go. The question is, how is that serving you well? Because it's only going to come back. How do you confront it in a healthy way? And what would you gain if you were to give expression to what you're feeling? Like, how might that benefit you? So I think in many ways, it's about asking more questions than trying to provide answers, especially, when you're dealing with a certain kind of guy, everything's a debate. And so, and everything is who's going to win the conversation. So I approach those conversations through the lens of just asking questions. How is this serving you well? What would happen if you did something different? What's the downside of expressing yourself? What does that make you believe about who you are as a man? And who told you that that's true, right? And is that working? Is it really working? And I found that an honest conversation with brothers, they come to an awareness that it's not serving them well. The problem is they don't know how to start doing anything else different. And that's where and so they'll pivot back to what they know, because, being open and expressive and talking about your feelings, they have no map. They have no memory of an example of another man in their life that did that. And so that's where it's important to have a therapist, someone who can help you in the process of finding your new map and exploring your new way of being that will serve you well in every way. When it comes to friends that you share your truth with, if you're lucky, you get two. But if you're fortunate, you'll get one. And all you need is one person, and that you can share the truth with, and a person, as Nicole said, who will not weaponize it later. And you already, I think for most people, we know who those people are in our lives. Those people who will, if they know the truth, they'll weaponize it later. But we know the people who are open to the truth and will just hold it, not try to solve it, not try to offer advice. But sometimes, most of the time, I think we just need somebody to hold it with open hands, not judge us, not offer advice, but just be present while we express what we're feeling and going through. When you don't have a person like that in your life, there again lies the value of finding a therapist you can connect with, because a big part of that role for the therapist is to hold that truth with open hands and not judge you, and walk alongside you and ask you questions that help you find your way. So there are tools available, and in many ways they're people. If it's not someone you know, and you're not used to talking to that person about the truth and your feelings, but you know they can handle it, position the conversation in such a way that you let them know, like, here's what we don't talk like this, but here's the conversation I really need to have with you, and here's my expectation of you going in this conversation, right? So that everybody's clear. But if you don't have a person,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you don't have a person like that, then yeah, I think that it is wise to identify a counselor who can help.
Okay, family, we're asking, we're here Wednesday Wellness with a therapeutic mental health advocate, Ramal Toon, and with two fine therapists, Dr. Nicole Kamak. I'm gonna get that right, Doctor. Please forgive me, Dr. Kamak, and Dr. Warren Mitchell. We ask you to give some questions. We've got one. One question has come in from Julie Gordon. She says, her suffering is her cross to bear. Dr. Kamak, why, she asks, should she go to therapy?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think how Ramal started asking those questions, I was sitting here like cheering you on, like those are such therapy questions. And I think I would pose that to Julie as well. Who said it's your cross to bear, and who said it's yours to bear alone? And we can just start there. Sometimes, we take on these roles or identities when maybe there are people who can help you to carry some of that, or so that it doesn't feel as heavy. And that's where you start to open up and figure out, even in the same way as you talked about, are there people who are showing up for you in ways that maybe you're not open to that? That could be one of those situations. I'm not sure. But therapy could be going through and figuring out, what am I holding on to that's not mine to carry anyway? That is like, I learned that in like 2019. I'm like, oh, that's not mine to carry. It reduced so much of my stress because we attach ourselves to these identities and to the suffering and to the heaviness of things that may not be ours. And so therapy can help you to figure that part out. You can figure out why that pathway even happened and sort of peel back those layers of, well, if we take all of this away, what's left for you? And it may not be as heavy as what you are carrying.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Nicole, as you were speaking, carrying a cross, your cross to bear, which is language we hear a lot in church. And the assumption is that it's heavy and a burden. It doesn't have to be a burden. You can bear it. So in ministry, my cross to bear is through service and connecting people to healing resources and talking about therapy and writing, right? But my cross is not my burden, right? It's something that I am grateful for. It's not a weight for me. So if it is a burden and something that you feel brings you pain, I think that's a contradiction to the cross, actually, because Jesus said, I've come that you might have a life and have it more abundantly. So that doesn't sound like burden to me. That doesn't sound like a life of struggle to me. And I think oftentimes as Black people, our journey has been filled with so much struggle that we think the purpose of life is struggle. When the purpose of life is to get beyond the struggle to abundant living. And so that requires a vision. So if your mindset is always burden and bearing something that's heavy, where's the vision for freedom from that? So I assume that there must be a destination, because without a destination, then yes, there will always be struggle because there's the absence of vision. And that's the word says, where there's no vision, people perish. And the saddest thing that can happen is not just perishing physically, but to have your dream die. To have your desire for freedom die while you're still here, because you have no idea of what freedom looks like for you. And so therefore life looks like struggle and burden and carrying something all the time, because you haven't clearly identified, God, show me my destination. Show me what freedom looks like for me, what abundance looks like for me. And it doesn't exclude you from serving others, but it doesn't mean that serving others require that you negate your own freedom.
Okay. Dr. Mitchell.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think if we look at Jesus, and when he realized the cross he had to bear, I'm not sure if I mentioned this one the last time, but even at Gethsemane, when he asked the disciples to come with him, and he went back a couple times to check in with them to see if they were awake, praying for him, praying with him, like, you know, he needed support. And even at the Gethsemane praying, he's like asking God for support, like, can you, like, you know, take this from me? Like, is there another way? Like, but he knew, but he just needed to probably unload that. He just needed to release it in a space that could receive it. And that was helpful for him. Even on the cross or walking, going towards the destination, someone supported him along the way. If it was just his burden to bear, he's like, no, I got it. No, he allowed that to him because the dude was tired and was beaten and he needed to release. And he was so grateful for the opportunity to release that on someone, for even if it was for a time being. So I think, and especially, unfortunately, as Ramal said, Black folks, but in particularly Black women, because of their need to keep the family community together, have taken that mindset and made it an identity that that's who I am. I have to bear the burden. That's what I got to do. That's what I saw my mom doing, my grandma doing. That's what we're about. If we don't do it, this whole thing is going to collapse. And you create this identity of this superwoman that is impossible, that you're not called to bear. That even when God called to remove some of that stuff, you're like, no, I got it. Nah, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm supposed, like, who gave you that idea? You know, and they can't say it's God if they have an in tune relationship with the Lord. They might say it's God because it's comfortable for them to hold on to a burden that makes them feel like they're a martyr or something, but it's unhealthy, mentally, spiritually, and physically, to carry burdens as a way of life.
Yeah, and a part of that, you know, and this is a good conversation going into Christmas, right? In many ways, so when I finally got into church and learning the ways of the church, and that one context I was in, and surely it doesn't happen everywhere, but in many of the examples I experienced early on, there was this idea that in order to be like Jesus, right, which is virtually impossible, you had to suffer like Jesus. But Jesus never asked you to suffer like him. The thing is, how about living into the life that Jesus suffered for, right? There was a reason for his suffering and his pain so that you could be free. So I don't know that when we don't live in freedom and pursue freedom, then we have to ask ourselves, are we living into the very thing that he died and was resurrected for? That is the very essence of the resurrection, the life that is to come and the life that you can live now. Not to suffer like Jesus, because you're not Jesus and you ain't gonna get up. So you might as well embrace a narrative that allows you to live into the very life that he gave his for, which is a life of abundance.
When we have so routinized this notion of bearing this burden, carrying this cross, and when we've had, and you all talked about this some before, this stigma, this anti-therapy stigma. How do we, Dr. Kamak, how do we now, as Warren mentioned this is especially, a woman raised that question, this is especially important for women. How do we get out of, what practices, what mindset, what things we need to get out of this notion that our identity is in bearing pain? And I ask that in light of some folk who are bearing pain right now and who feel they ought not have to bear it, but it's on them. It's kind of regular. What do we?
This is a good conversation because I do think, like, when we look at historically Black people in America, so much of our history has been rooted in suffering to the point that it becomes our norm. It becomes what we think we have to endure. And then because of the things that our people have survived, there was a badge of honor for being able to get through the suffering. Right. So it's not just that we want to be the strong Black woman. It's like, well, look at what our people have been through, what they survived. That's, you look at it and you're like, so I should be able to handle this. This is what I come from. And so that just becomes a part of how you're taught about being a woman, what you're taught being a good woman is, what you're taught about being a mother. And women carry that to the core, because if you don't live up to those standards, people give you the side eye, like, you're not living up to this idea of what we think a woman, a Black woman, should be. About like 2 or 3 years ago, I started to think, like, don't call me a strong Black woman, because when you do that, you don't see me as a human. You want me to carry this superhero identity, and I can't take it anymore because it's so heavy. And to have to say that to people, you know, they look at you like, what? I don't care how you look. This is too much for me. I need help. And so when I work with women, which has become one of my passions, and working with Black women, is like, release that burden. You don't have to do this. Going back to those questions, who told you that makes you a good mother? I wonder what it would be like to ask for help and allow those people around you to respond. What would it be to tell your husband, this is too much. I'm doing all of this, but I'm burning from both ends of the candle and I can't make it? What would it be like to tell someone you need help? They respond, and then you get that sort of like feedback, like, oh, these people, not only did they listen, they can show up for me in ways. So maybe there are more things that I can open up about. Maybe there are more ways that I can ask for help. The tough part is that everyone around you may not subscribe to that, and they may still try to hold those things onto you. So that's a part of it, just giving people that space and that permission. Oftentimes in therapy, I feel like that's what I'm doing with Black women, is like, you don't have to do that. That doesn't mean, like, strength is being vulnerable. Strength is coming to therapy every week and facing those things that you would much rather avoid. Strength is doing the work because it's not easy. So when you tell me being a strong Black woman is suffering, no, ma'am, we're not doing that here. So I think that's a part of it, both that historical context, but also how we all buy into that, and you don't have to. And it's a sort of foreign place to be like, we don't have to do that. There may be another way of mothering, of showing up as a woman. And how do you do that?
Thank you. Correlated, I guess. Dr. Warren Ramal, brother often would say, I'm not taking that. I'm not going to use the word because I'm the pastor and I can't use the word here. But I ain't taking no. I'm not trying to play that suffering game. What do we say to the brother that is not going to suffer, but just kind of drops out of sight, or doesn't deal, or just gets quiet, or sits on the side? Are you following me? What do we say to him? I'm not going to be Superman, but I'm going to withdraw in some way, or I'm going to explode. What do we say to him?
I would try to understand the position he's in, that he has taken. Like, why is he taking that position? Is that something that he's chosen willingly, or is that something that he has been groomed to take? Is that what he has witnessed and modeled? Is there some reason, instead of judging him right away or at all, just try and understand and let him see that you're interested in trying to understand where he is and why he is in that space, and what does he want for himself? And if being in that space, that's kind of similar to what Ramal was saying earlier, does that space serve you or help you to become who you say you want to be? You say you're never going to be to your kid the way your father was to you, but you're disappearing. You may have your reasons why you're disappearing. Your father had his, right? You know about yours more personally, but did you know about your father's personally and what he may have been dealing with, why he disappeared? Not to say it's an excuse, but they're reasonings why people do what they do. And I think we need to understand the reasonings. We need to get to understand where people are before we come with the communication of morality or judgment. we need to come with the communication of love, of understanding and acceptance. So for that guy, that's what I would say, to try to meet that person where they are. Why are you here? And is it serving you?
Ramon.
Yeah, I think, there's, those two extremes of trying to be, the superhero, unhealthy version, and then totally withdrawing. I found in conversations with brothers who have withdrawn, or even when I've withdrawn myself, it has been because I'm just tired. You have tried to be Superman and tried to live in this idea of who people told you were supposed to be as a man, and not only just as a man, but the career choices and decisions that were made were tied to a story that wasn't mine. And I think a lot of brothers have been living into a way of being and living that was a script that was handed to them. And they never questioned.
Say more about that. Tied to a story that wasn't yours. What are you meaning when you say that? Unpack
that. We grow up in environments in our households with our parents, our aunts, our uncles, and our communities, where people are, based on their experience, trying to impose that experience on us, and who, based on their experience, we're supposed to be as men. And so, a mom can still hand down a toxic story to her male son, even though she's been in relationship with men based on that narrative she handed down that didn't serve her well. Be strong, don't cry, man up, just carry it, get over it. And then that man accepts that story, lives into it, a life of silence and strong and carrying stuff and never expressing feelings. And it doesn't serve him well, gets into a relationship with a woman who asked a complicated question that simply says, so how are you feeling? But he was nurtured by a woman who told him, don't feel, man up, be strong, don't cry, don't express. So how do you respond when someone asks you how you're even feeling? No one ever told you have permission to. And so that's living into a story that never gave you permission to take control of your own script and define for yourself who you want to be in the world. Our parents do it, our relatives do it, our communities do it. We live in environments that send us messages all the time of what is required of you here to be a man, to survive here as a man, not to be a healthy man, but there's a certain type of man that you have to become in order to survive. And so a lot of men are living into a survival narrative, not a thriving narrative, and can oftentimes feel like they're trapped. Because if I live into a narrative that allows me to thrive, it can make me vulnerable here. It can make physically, it can be dangerous to be healthy here, right? Because it can open up opportunities to be taken advantage of, deemed weak. And so you find some brothers living into a persona that they really don't want, but feel like they have no choice.
Okay, now if they're in a persona that they don't want, that they really don't want, but they're in a surrounding that almost force that. How? One of our people asking, how do we get that guy, those men, those boys, into therapy?
Well, I think it's not just therapy. I was talking to a friend the other day who's doing some work in a very, very rough neighborhood. And a big part of it, I told him, was what helped me young, was exposure. I think, and that's just not just for young cats, that's for older brothers too, who have not seen another way of being and living and doing things. Another example of what manhood looks like. They've never been in close proximity to it. They can see it on TV and see, Black male successful folks, but they've never been in proximity to it. So to take people out of that context and exposure to another way of being, that is space where they can even engage in conversation with those other brothers. But then, yes, therapy too is another component. I think therapy is a little harder for that guy because, again, a therapy is going to equip you with some tools you got to take back to the jungle, right? And those tools don't serve you well in that context. And so the only alternative you feel you have is you have to leave the context. And I think for a lot of men like myself, I've always felt like I don't belong anywhere, right? Because I'm no longer that dude I had to be in the jungle, but now I'm around people who don't understand what it took to leave the jungle, right? And who can't grasp, like, man, there's a beast in me I've had to tame, and y'all don't understand the work I constantly have to do to show up in this new place. And so I still feel like I don't fit into this new place either, because they either don't come from it or they don't admit that they come from it. And so you become the brother who feels like I have no one who can identify with me. And that's why a lot of brothers don't leave, because it's kind of like, who's going to understand when I leave here? Those people don't go through this. And many of the ones who did don't talk about it. So you feel like you're on an island unto yourself.
Okay, well, exposure sounds like that might be one way, but exposure that sends you back in the jungle with tools that don't help, that's not the best thing either. Dr. K-Mac, Dr. Mitchell, what do we do here?
Well, let me say something real quick. It's not that the tools don't help. It's just that you wrestle with, how do I use these here?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Because nobody else is trying to do all this work.
Okay. Okay. I get
so
that.
You feel like, yeah, they work. It's just like, in that context, is very hard.
Thank my genius friend. Oh, that's my dude. Tune is my guy. He tunes up. Y'all respond to Ramal there. That was fascinating.
Something that was reminding me of was the book, The Four Agreements. Yeah. And how in the book it sort of goes through how there are some of these things that we quote unquote agree to that we didn't really agree to. Like, it starts in the home, in the church, in the school, and you just sort of buy into these identities. And it's sort of two ways, as you were talking about it, Ramal, is one is like, these are the tools that the systems around you have. And so maybe they are tools for survival, but as you are evolving as a person, do they continue to serve you in the same way? And so in reading that book, for me, part of it was like, oh, wait, what have I sort of like taken on that maybe it doesn't align with who I am at this point in my life? And what do I do with that? So some of it is really doing that soul searching on your own to even figure out how those things show up for you, what's working, what's not working, so that you can start to figure out, where do I need to make those changes? Therapy can be a part of that process because it is that safe space, and you have someone that's asking those questions and guiding you to get to that deeper level.
Okay. Brother Lawrence, continue that, and you and Ramal, how does pride figure into this, particularly for the men?
I think with regards to pride, there might be an identity that we have bought into. And said that this is who I am as a man, and especially as being a strong man, not seen as a weakness. And when you are asking me to do something that's going to expose vulnerability, I see you trying to make me, quote unquote, vulnerable or weak so that you can take advantage of me. So this is him talking to his woman, his mother, female in his life that is trying to get him some support. And so he doesn't see therapy as a strength or powerful thing. He sees it as an opportunity to weaken you, or only weak men go see a therapist to help you. I'm supposed to solve my own problem. That's what a man is supposed to do. And so pride comes in and you create a story where it takes you into a trance where you buy into a concept or an identity. That's not who you are, but you can't even see yourself when you're in that space. So it makes you think that what you're feeling and thinking in that space is right and is just. And pride can blind us to the truth because it operates more from a passionate or an emotional perspective rather than one that is truly authentic, where we can step aside. If what I say is true, then I can step aside of it and look at it and not be afraid that it's going to crumble because I am not aligned with it in an objective perspective. But if I'm afraid to step outside of what I think to be true because I'm afraid that it might make me vulnerable, then I don't think you're truly aligned with truth. And pride gives you a way of an excuse of hiding under the rock and pretending that rock is really your strength when it's not. It's just a hiding space.
It's hiding. Ramal, I believe you got something.
Yeah. I was thinking about that through something Nicole said earlier. When you receive the tools and you shift context, it's really hard trying to live into this new way of being, knowing what you know, realizing that the way I was before wasn't serving me well. Being closed off, isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. Vulnerability isn't weakness. But that's constantly playing against another tape that, for years, that tape has been running. And the two are in conflict. And I thought about it like this Saturday, right? I don't know if Vance, I'm sure you might be familiar with Versus, right? They're doing one with Too Short and E40, right? So I went to school with E40. I grew up in those neighborhoods, East Oakland and in the Crest. That's where my identity was shaped. And listening to your question, Nicole, I'm like, man, if they saw the way I live now and the way I engage in relationship, they would be like, man, you're just breaking all the rules, right? Like, this is not what you're supposed to be doing. Because that narrative that I grew up with was all this freedom, the way I see it through expression and vulnerability and communicating and feeling, is totally stands against everything I was taught about manhood and even about being in relationship with a woman. It's just all contradiction to what they talk about. And what they talk about is what I grew up with, my uncles and everyone. And so when I'm in conversation with men, one of the things that Warren and I have actually done on several occasions that has actually worked well, and it goes to one of the questions that was asked around how do you get Black men into therapy, is we have traveled to different cities together and literally done workshops. We did one at Central where I share my journey and then he shares what that looks like through the lens of working with someone as a therapist. And for men in the room, it takes the mystery away from what a therapist looks and sounds like, because they have an idea in their head, what the relationship looks like, because they see us in the room. And they hear me sharing my story, and they hear him unpacking all of that from a professional perspective, and realize like, oh, it's actually not what I thought, and what they thought, no frame of reference anyway. So it's one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's one way. Exposure. I think workshops that put brothers in context. Those of us who are doing the work, talking about it. Platforms like this create safe space, right? There are probably brothers right now looking, but they're not typing in the comments, right? But they're here, and that's what matters most. So, and everybody has their process. It's just step by step.
We're running out of time. This has been a great conversation. Thank you all so much. But I've got another thing about the sisters that came up. And I got to be sure that I get this, Dr. Kamak, and brothers, if you have something for it as well. How do you convince people? How does the sister, the superwoman, Black Macho, the myth of the superwoman, how does the sister convince other people that she can't do everything and still function?
Mm-hmm. It's having those conversations and changing, like saying no. as a complete sentence, and that being it, asking for help and reminding people. It's interesting because exactly what you say happened to Black men, it happens to Black women too, where you're living in these dual worlds. And it's like, if you start changing too much, people are looking at you like, wait a minute, what's going on? You no longer fit here. But then that way isn't working for you. And so it's really, Julie, I would encourage you to take a look at how is that showing up in your life. I have this thing where it's like, if something is showing up in one place, it's showing up in other places as well. And I did a personal thing where I'm looking at, like, I take on all of this stuff at home with, all of these pieces that I have, but it also shows up at work. And I take on all of these jobs and I find myself doing the extra and I'm burned out. And I look at the people around me and they're not. And I just started saying, I can't do that. I'm really struggling. This is hard. As we were going through the pandemic in the beginning, there were so many people who just wanted, because you're a psychologist, you should be able to take this. And I had to even remind my boss, I'm a person first. And not only am I helping people who are dealing with the pandemic, I'm going through it myself, and I'm going through it as a mother. So if you want me to make it through, I suggest you take some things off my plate because I can't do it. Now, it took me a long time to get there, but I think part of it is just how do you start to have those conversations with people? And maybe it shows up in those little ways first. Maybe you can test it out, because the truth is you're not going to go from carrying all of this and then to one day letting it all go. But maybe you can start to let go of little tasks, little roles. Maybe you don't sign up to take on something. If you don't volunteer, maybe you try out, let me just say no and see what happens. And it may feel uncomfortable for you because it's foreign from what you would normally do, but just stick in that discomfort and do it and see how you feel afterwards. Like, oh, that wasn't so bad. I actually got to sleep in because I didn't do all of this stuff for other people. Or maybe you start to navigate, are there those things that you absolutely do want to do? Maybe there are some things and some roles that are essential to who you are, but where are the pieces that you can let some of those other things go, and let them go? I don't care if you just have to rest and do nothing. That's your time, your life. Rest. That's a part of the reset, and that's going to keep you going.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. We're down just a minute. I want to ask 30-second wrap up from each of you. I'm going to begin with Ramal, 30 seconds, and I'm going to Nicole, then I'm going to Warren. Thank you so much. Ramal?
Yeah. So 30-second wrap up. One, Vance, thank you for doing this a second time for the Central family and others who are watching. These are important conversations. I would encourage folks who are watching to really, in this, Christmas season, start with being honest with yourself, honest with God, and be good to yourself, so that you can go into this next year with a different mindset and a desire for a new way of being that serves you well and serves the people well that you care about.
Thanks, bro. Thank you. Dr. Kamak?
Yeah, I also want to thank you for having me. Again, this is great. I think that these conversations are how you get people to therapy, because we just normalized what it is and the benefits of it. And you get to see people who look like you having the discussion. I want to say, if you're going through this holiday season and it is difficult for you, if there are those people around you that you trust or who's reaching out to you or your support, lean into that. And, don't think that you have to do this alone.
All right. Dr. Mitchell.
Thanks again, like everybody else is saying, for the opportunity to be here. And thank you, panelists, for being here and sharing this conversation and discussion. Look at this season as it's a season of hope. It's a season where it unifies the God of law and to the God of grace and love, and it's the God among us, the God with us, the God in us, and really recognizing that this is an opportunity to shed old ways and renew oneself in our perception of who we think we are and who even we think God is. So sometimes just identify with God the way that he shows up. One of the ways he shows up for me is wisdom. And so God is a God of wisdom for me. And so find our own terms. We don't just have to use the biblical terms. Find our own terms. This relationship is personal. Make it so.
I forgot to get you all's contact information, but I think we have it from before. So we're going to utilize that contact information to be sure people can be in touch with you. Again, Ramal Toon, thank you so very much for being the advocate that you are and helping us to have these marvelous, marvelous professionals with us. Dr. Warren Mitchell, thank you so very much for being with us and among us again. Dr. Nicole Kamak, thank you so much. Don't be surprised if the Central people call for you again. Don't be surprised at all. We're so grateful. Thank you so very much. Family on the phone, family on Facebook, thank you all so very much for being here with us tonight. Please, please know, by the grace of God, we do this and we're able to do this through our contacts, our connections with our church and the concerned Black clergy. We want to thank them for the opportunity we had to get resources for this. We want to be sure you know that this is for the healing of our people. We want to bring people here who love Black people, who love the church, and who want to see the healing of the nation. All brands, all hues. Thank you so very much. For all who participated, we want to also thank our producer, director, Pastor Willie Nelson from the Owsley Church, the pastor of worship. He's a bad man. Thank you so very much, my brother. Those of you at Central United Methodist Church, please know we're going to have right after this, we're going to have a time of debrief for our Bible study time. That'll happen in a couple of minutes. Thank you so much. Again, family, this Christmas Advent season, we want to be sure people are healed and helped. And so we'll have the information from these professionals up for you so that you can take advantage of that. Thank you again for being with us. You take good care. Keep the faith. Be safe. Wear your mask. Social distance. And as always, on behalf of all the good people at the Central United Methodist Church, I'm Pastor Vance P. Ross. Be well. Bye now.